In this video, I'm going to show you how the selection panel considers your CV after you submit it and why this should definitely influence how you construct and structure your CV. Hi, I'm Anthony. I'm the Career Doctor. I help other doctors with their careers by making videos that are helpful, like on the job application process. If you are new to this channel and what you're seeing and hearing is useful, I'd really like you to consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you can get access to all of my videos, including the current ones and any future ones. So we did a live webinar with over 70 trainee doctors registered one evening this week, and it was on the topic of how does the selection panel look at your CV. And I talked in that video about my expertise in this area and how many CVs and selection processes I've sat in on, and what it's like from an insider's perspective to review a bunch of CVs. And so we went through the steps that occur after you submit your CV and what the implications are for how to put a great CV together. Towards the end of the webinar, we also talked about whether you should or should not submit a cover letter these days, and there was a general question and answer session. So I'd encourage you to watch this video all the way through. So welcome everyone to this session on how the panel views your CV. I'm Anthony Llewellyn from Advanced Med. Just a few acknowledgements. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on a range of countries, at least in Australia and possibly also in New Zealand, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Also would like to thank my colleague Neil, who's joining us on the chat and who'll be monitoring the chat box. And probably the best way, if people have got a question initially, is to type it in the chat box, and I can unmute you if you would like to ask your question verbally as well. And also thank you also to Wavelength, who I think some people got an email from them about tonight's webinar. Just a little bit about some of the technology we'll be demonstrating here tonight. There's a product called Visual CV, which is one of many online resume builders that are available, but one that I've been using to play around a bit with in terms of styling nice CVs. So if you want to check that product out, you can go through that link, bit.ly Advanced Med Visual CV. That is an affiliate link, so you can use that as a free version, but if you do ever end up signing up for it, we get a little bit in return, so that helps us as well. So what we'd like to cover tonight is how the panel goes about reviewing your CV, and there is a bit of a caveat there. What I'm going to be talking about is more about the process of how panels that are employment panels for public health service jobs go about reviewing your CV. There are, of course, other types of situations where panels review your CV, such I guess the other big example are college selection processes. So things will vary from context to context, but a lot of the principles we're going through tonight will still be the same. What I thought I'd break it down into is the process of the initial review of the CV when the CV comes in as part of your application. Then what happens in the sort of pre-interview period, and then what happens with your CV at the interview stage. So the question is, can I please ask what Andrew's background is? I'm presuming you mean Anthony's background. That's me. Yes, I will get that shortly. Okay, so the next thing we'll be going over is implications for CV content and design. We'll also touch a little bit on the topic of cover letters, whether they are still relevant or not in the JMO application process. And sorry. And finally, there's an opportunity at the end for a bit of a general Q&A on the job application process. So as I said, there are lots of different selection and recruitment processes. We're going to mainly concentrate on the employer selections, but they will generally apply to other processes. Some selection processes do now actually include a weight given to the CV, and I think that's generally a better way of doing it. And so if that is the case, then I think that's a little bit more transparent, and that what that means is they will be assessing your CV on some sort of criteria, and the weight, let's say 30%, will go towards the overall decision of selecting you. But in most cases, the CV is really about firstly deciding whether you get an interview and then helping them during the interview phase. We do invite your participation during the meeting by asking a question. You can either do that on video or audio, or by typing in the chat box. As we are recording this meeting, the chat box is probably best if you don't wish to be identified, and we can certainly blur anyone's names out and de-identify them later on, and we will be providing this video to other people who haven't been able to see it live on YouTube. So someone was asking about my background. So I've been involved in a range of medical management roles in my career. I'm background as a psychiatrist, but pretty much once I got involved in psychiatry, even as a trainee, I was involved in medical admin roles. I was the director of medical workforce in my health service for a number of years as well. And a little while ago, I took on for 4 years the role of the medical director at HEDI, and was the medical director for HEDI for about 4 years. I've literally reviewed thousands of CVs in my career, and conducted hundreds and hundreds of selection processes. Most recently, the thing that I've done is provide a review for the College of Physicians into best practice in trainee selection, and that was done this year. So looking at some of the current methodology around that. Just checking everyone can see that again. Looks like that's coming back on. Apologies for that. We'll just so there you can see my credentials. So I formed the Advanced Med company with Neil, and I guess our mission is to help as many doctors fill in the existing gap in how to manage things like career transitions. We've noticed some of the formal education institutions struggle with some of these things like job skills, how to put a CV together, how to prepare for the interview process. Also things like when you're becoming a bit more senior, how to sort of move up to the next level and deal with things like leadership and management challenges. So that's where we focus our efforts, and that's why we've put together this organisation. So what happens in the initial review phase with your CV? So you've put all that time and effort into developing your CV, and it would be nice to sort of know what's happening with it. So really the initial review phase is very much about an exercise in shortlisting or culling CVs. It's really driven by generally one individual, or perhaps an admin assistant, and then supported by the chair of the selection panel. Very rarely is it done by a group at the initial phase. So what that means is that it's done under a lot of time pressure. Some people literally, and I've been in this position, are reviewing hundreds of CVs in a short frame of time. Large numbers of applications, as I said, and really the aim at this point is to really work out how many people are required to be interviewed at the next phase. So what does that mean? It's also an implication for further resources, because what they're trying to work out is how much time do we need to interview people, how many interview panelists, how many slots is it going to take, 1 day, 2 days, etc., etc. So you would have heard this concept possibly bandied around the internet about the fact that the average CV initial review time is around 6 seconds. Some people debate that. Some people say that it might be slightly longer. This is a picture from a piece of research done by the Ladders company a little while ago now. Some people may have heard me talk about this concept. What they did was get a bunch of recruiters, and they used eye tracking software to watch how they were reviewing people's CVs. And so you can see the hotspots there on the screen demonstrating where they're looking. And so this study showed that the average amount of time taken to do the initial CV review was 6 seconds. The interesting thing about that study is, if you read a little bit more about it, this is an example of them showing someone hotspotting a LinkedIn CV, and you can see there's a lot of red around the photo there. What that demonstrates is just another piece of evidence as to why you're probably best off not putting a photo on your CV, because it's distracting people from the important elements of the CV. You don't want, if it takes people 6 seconds to read the CV, you don't want them spending 2 of those 6 seconds looking at your photo and implying a whole lot of biases when they should be looking at your name, your qualifications, and some of the things that you bring to the job role. I might just see if there's any questions at that point. If not, I'm just going to go through with you my process of reviewing CVs. Can we put the photo at the end? Look, I really wouldn't recommend putting a photo on your CV. I'll go through the rationale here for you right now. I'm actually a fairly modern person, as you can tell, because we're using technology. The thing is, it's a conservative profession. If you ask most panelists, about 4 out of 5 will say don't put the photo on. I think some of the reasons that those that want the photo on are a little bit, I would not agree with, in terms of they want to get a feel for who you are. Yes, it's helpful to have a bunch of photos afterwards when you're trying to remember all the people that you've been interviewing, but from the candidate's perspective, you've also removed your opportunity to make an impression on the panel. Just having a photo, we're human beings, we have all sorts of implicit biases. If we see the photo, we'll start to make assumptions about who you are as a person, and so you're actually removing that opportunity for a first impression. So I think there's quite a bunch of reasons as to why to avoid it. Now, in some cases, they're actually, like I heard the other day at, I think, the Melbourne Kids Hospital, they were actually requesting a photo from everyone. Well, I guess if everyone's putting forward a photo, then you have to do it, and you're probably on a more equal footing. But then you might have to invest in a professional photo. Similar, I guess, to the, not having an unprofessional email address. It's probably worth investing a little bit of money and getting a nice photo if you can. But otherwise, don't. So what are the implications for this quick initial review phase? Well, I think the first thing is your key aim here is to make it through that review phase. So really, impressing is probably a secondary aim at this point. And so you want to make it easy for the reviewer. I'll talk to you a little bit about how you can do that, but you want to provide them key information in an easily found location to avoid any chance or risk that they miss that, and therefore you don't go into the interview pile, and you go into the non-interview pile. So you need to know what the key information that they're looking for is, and you need to put it in an obvious place. So reviewing the job description, the ad, what's put in online for the application is a very good idea, because you want to look for key information there that assists you in terms of how you then go about tailoring your CV and making sure that all the key information is where it needs to be, which is generally on the front page. And you need to then also look at your CV and ask yourself the question, does the CV address the key criteria of the position, or the essential selection criteria? Typical key selection criteria are things like your medical degree, your registration status, years of experience, and training status. Things like years of experience are a little bit old-fashioned in a recruitment, but you do often see that listed down. And so you'll often see people requesting, must have a medical degree or be general registered. So you want to particularly put that in an obvious location so people can go tick, tick, that's present, that person meets those. So we're talking about this concept about everything of importance going on the front page, and that's generally things like your name, your short qualifications, your career goal summary or statement, and your most recent work history, and your personal details, obviously. So this is an example of a CV that I've made up. You can see this is for a Dr. Kate Jones. And so this is how I go about reviewing the CV. Firstly, I do look for a name. Secondly, it's helpful if there's some short summary qualifications there. In this case, we've got the BMed. It's useful if there are some personal detail, contact details. Most people know to do that. What's also often useful is the presence of the ARPA number there, so that saves you having to sort of hunt through the CV, particularly if you're doing a registration check. So that's my first scan of the top bit of the CV. The next bit is I look for some sort of introductory statement about the person, and I'm really looking for some keywords that meet with the position description. Okay, so yes, we're looking for some sort of an introductory statement or career goal summary, and we're looking for some keywords. Yeah, we're looking for some keywords, and sorry, this is slowing down. This is a bit of a complex slide to do on a webinar. And then what I'm going to do is, if I see those keywords, I'm kind of like going to make a note of it. I may not circle it like that, but I'm going to think, yes, well, I'd like to come back and read that in a little bit more depth. And then I'm just going to skim down and look at their work experience. I'm going to be particularly interested in what the last job they've been doing. And that's pretty much about it. I may, depending on whether I'm satisfied or not, flick over the back page and look for references. Some people are particularly keen on seeing what sort of referees people have put down. I'm not so, I don't really care to too much extent who someone's referees generally are at this point. Certainly what I'm more interested in is what they tell me when I get to the point of collecting a reference. So that's it. I mean, and that, that can take you a few seconds to do. And so you notice we've skipped over pretty much the rest of the content of the CV in doing that. So things that are on pages 2, 3, and 4 are often not looked at in this phase. So this is why we recommend a structure a little bit like this. Firstly, you do want to actually get your name in big letters and make it obvious so people can see that. Qualification summary, your details and ARPA registration. Then spend a little bit of time on the front page, maybe the first quarter or third on your career goal. And then the next thing from an employer selection process should be your work history or work experience and work achievements. Now, depending on how much you've done, that may well then get you to the end of the first page, even into the second page. For some, you may then be able to come back and give a little bit more detail about your education history. And that's this, emphasising this is for employer jobs in particular. It probably is very much the same for college selection, but there might be the need to emphasise your education a little bit more. I often see CVs where people list their education first before their work history. That's really doing yourself a disservice. We, as employers or representing employers on panels, we're more interested in what you've been able to do in the job. Your education gets you into the work, and it's helpful, but it's really how you demonstrate skills in the workplace that's of most interest to us. We then get asked, well, what about all the other headings? And I've just listed some there in the in the right page there just before referees. It really doesn't matter. You can use the sort of headings that best suit and compile your CV. Sometimes research is not is a good heading if you've got lots of true research papers, but maybe you might want to try publications or a different title that helps you bring in other sort of related research activities. It's in terms of the order that's best. It's really from after education. It really is which elements represent you best as a candidate. It doesn't matter in particular what order from there, but of course referees do come last. So again, everything of importance should be on your front page. A little bit about career goal statements. We've talked about this before. So I've talked about career goal statements a lot over the last few months, but I do emphasise that they're a very good way of pulling together the key elements of your CV. They're in particular very useful for grabbing all these things in the second and third page that are relevant to the position that you're applying for and putting them on the front page so they're not overlooked there. So a really good career goal statement will readily convey to the reviewer where you see yourself in the future, what you've done already to get there, and how you plan to keep working towards your career goal. It's also, as I said, an opportunity to bring out key elements and achievements from your CV that might be buried deeper and particularly relevant to that job. So this is where it's important to review all sections of your CV when you're going for a new job. And it's also useful to sort of keep different versions of your CV. Sometimes you drop things out of your CV because they're not as relevant to a particular job application, but you can come back to them a little bit later. It's also, in the career goal statement, an opportunity to show that you meet the basic eligibility requirements for the position. So I guess as an example, if the job is requiring certain years of experience, then you can put that in your career goal statement. So review the position description, particularly look at the selection criteria, and make sure you're trying to address as many of them as possible in your career goal statement. Some tips for career goal statements. They really should show that you've been proactive. What have you done so far to get where you want to go? What sort of training have you done? What experience have you had? Have you been to any particular courses? Have you engaged a mentor? That sort of stuff. They may not be relevant in all circumstances, although as we've found in New South Wales recently, you can upload more than one CV, it appears, to the New South Wales JOMO recruitment system. So one of the circumstances where the career goal statement might not be relevant is where you're lodging one CV for a bunch of different jobs that you're applying for, and you don't want to annoy one panel by telling them that you really want to work in another area. But it is possible, at least on the New South Wales JOMO recruitment system, to have a different CV for every job that you're applying for. It's important to not overshoot too much. Think about the next step that you're going to, not 2 or 3 steps into the future. I've seen a few career goal statements that kind of come across as a little bit unrealistic, and it's probably worth just bringing down the expectations a little bit. They do need to be authentic, as I say, and this leads me to another big tip for CVs. Other than, and possibly even more important than the tip of getting everything important on the front page, is the need to always have someone else review your CV. There's so many reasons for it, but get a check from someone else about is what you're writing coming across as authentic and genuine? Is it overshooting? But of course, getting someone to review your CV will also pick up any errors that you might have made. After you've revised your CV a few times, you're probably missing that typo or missing that formatting error that someone else can easily pick up for you too. And there are other reasons to get people to review your CV as well. So that's the initial phase. In some cases, there will be like a pre-interview phase where the panel is given a list of the candidates and a bit of an opportunity to review the applications before the interview. And then in some cases, there'll be a lot of interest in that. So this is really kind of about the other panel members browsing the candidates, getting themselves familiar with who's coming through. It's probably still going to be a fairly quick review. They're just going to have particularly if there's a number of candidates to look at, they're going to quickly skim through and have a look. But your key aim here now is because you are in that interview phase, very rarely is there a second process where another cull goes on. So pretty much once the culling's done and the panel's looking at it, generally everyone's going to be interviewed at that point. Your key aim here is to try and leave a good impression. So key matters here are, again, as I said, the front page, what referees you've got listed. Some panel members are very interested in the sort of the names of referees that might be put down. And also I think good, simple, clean, professional design that helps you stand out and again, make some of those elements a bit more obvious. So what am I talking about there? So lots of white space. Here's a couple of examples from this visual CV program that I've used. But you could easily do this in a Microsoft Word format. Make it attractive, set it out, keep it consistent, not too many embellishments or, a little bit of style is good, but don't go for more than a couple of colours. Have one set of indenting. Don't sort of indent and then indent and indent and indent. Just keep it nice and clean. Again, this is where it's helpful to get someone else to look at it. I generally, in terms of fonts in particular, I would stick away from the one on the right in terms of the cerise, the serif font, the sans serif, which means there's no inflections on the fonts, is generally a little bit easier to read on the eye. And then there's a bunch of other sort of examples I've pulled from this visual CV program. I pulled this up just to demonstrate that sometimes you can get a little bit more and still have that sort of nice, clean white space with a couple of columns. So you can get a little bit more on your front page by going to a 2-column approach, and that can look okay and nice. I don't think that one in the top right, I don't think is overdoing it too much either. So the panel are kind of been browsing, and now they're getting ready to interview you. So we're getting into the interview phase, and we're really talking about maybe the day before, but generally the day of the interview. I come back to this photo because it helps me to remember that they will be sitting there discussing candidates in between when they're coming in the room. And there'll be a bunch of paperwork in front of them. You will notice that when you come into the room. That would generally include a stack of CVs, at least one, a printout of each CV of each candidate. Generally, they'll only print it out once because that's quite a big print run, but people have access to that and the ability to sort of refamiliarise themselves with you and your CV. And so they very well will be looking at the CV of the person about to come up. Depending on how many questions, if someone's not asked a question, you might even notice that they're flicking through the CV while you're being interviewed. In psychiatry, we talk about this concept in kids of the transition object, and I like to think that the CV is a bit like that. It's the physical representation of you to the panel when you're not actually there. So again, having a nice, good CV, and I don't want to overdo this, but I think having a CV that represents you well can be of a little bit more assistance before you come into the room and after you leave the room, particularly if you've cued the panel in the interview process to your CV. So if you're dropping statements in the interview about, as it shows in my CV or as I've written in my CV, that's going to just nudge them to go back and look at it again. And that might just be a little bit helpful to you in the whole scheme of things. You know, if they didn't hear you correctly, or maybe they just wanted to get a bit more information about you, if they know your CV's there and they can get a little bit more out of it, that might just help them to push you a little bit further up in the rankings, or maybe overlook something that you said in the interview because, you know, you've addressed that in your CV, for example. So what are the implications for the interview phase in terms of your CV? As I say, I think your CV is you. It's your, you know, it's the personal document that you put together. They do tend to print out all the application material, but that all looks the same because it's all coming out of the system. The CV is the thing that's different. And so it just represents you in a personal way to the panel. So read through it the day prior. You've often people have sort of put a bit of effort into it, but there's a bit of lag going into this interview, and you just want to make sure you're familiar with what you've written. You want to avoid any embarrassment where a panel member who really likes your CV and has picked something up on page 3 that you've forgotten about and is asking you questions about it, and you're kind of not sure what they're going on about. But also just check that everything you've written 3 or 4 months ago remains accurate. I mean, there might be some things that have changed in between as well. And as I said, it's not a bad idea to refer to it a couple of times in the interview. You know, you're cueing people to say, look, yes, I can give you some information in this 15 to 20 minutes, but there's a whole lot more about me that you can find out, and it's all been nicely packaged for you in my CV. I guess the way I think about it is you put a lot of effort into this thing. Why not get as much out of it as you possibly can? So that's CV. I might just pause and see if there are any questions about how the panel regards your CV. So the question is, what if I have an in-progress research project? Yes, a good question. This comes up a fair bit. Sanajutha. Yeah, look, as I said, you can use whatever headings you like. So I think this could come under research. So what you can do is put it down, or you could have another heading called projects. So you should list under every heading. You should have things in reverse chronological order. But yes, if there's a research project that's in progress, you can list that. You probably put the date, the years you've been working on it, the title of the project. If it's in the process of being accepted by a publication, you can potentially put those details in, and maybe a little bit of information about the project, who you're working with. So it doesn't all have to be in that sort of Vancouver style referencing thing. You can list it in whatever way you want, and yes, you can put that under heading like research. So this is why I probably advise a lot of trainees to avoid the heading of publications, because that kind of implies formal papers. But if you use the word research, you can put peer-reviewed papers, you can put down projects you're involved in, you can put down a paper that you aren't an author on but you were acknowledged as an assistant in, you can put down posters you presented, you can even talk about conferences that you've gone to that's relevant to research. And then some people also get into sort of blogging and other things that could come under a heading of teaching or even writing or communication. If documenting research, should it only include publications or our presentations and posters? Okay. Yeah, so I think, Dave, you can include all those things under research. You might even have subheadings sometimes, paper, peer-reviewed papers, posters, etc., presentations. How much is too much to include? My rule of thumb with these CVs, you'll see some people say make it 2 pages. I just think that's a little bit unrealistic at times, particularly if people have been working for 3 or 4 or 5 years in medicine, but try and keep it down to 4. And that will mean that you have to limit some things. Some people, you'll see CVs, they have 2 or 3 pages worth of research stuff on it. That is excessive. It's okay to chop some of that out and make it selected research, if you want to call it that. And you can even have a thing that says, a list of full research activities is available upon request. The reason I suggest that is, remember, this is an employment position. You don't want it to, and we have all sorts of biases when we look at these things. You don't want it to come across to the panel that this person is very, very, very academic, because a lot of people will be wondering, well, are they going to just be doing research? Are they going to be doing clinical work as well? So you want your CV to look balanced, and you do want it to come across that you're engaged and you're passionate about clinical work, because that's what we, at the end of the day, care about. We said in the primary way, it's about clinical care. Yes, it's also about having good trainees and people who want to go do decent research, but you don't want to overshadow that with a CV that's got lots and lots of research in it. So hopefully that, yep, perfect, thanks. Okay. What to do if someone has a long gap of practice overseas and now wants to start here in Australia? Does the observership help? Yes, it does. And this is a situation where you might want to change the order of your CV. If you've been, you'd still have a good career goals summary. If your most recent activities around upskilling using observerships and training, you might sort of have that as your heading. Then depending on how long a gap it's been, you might then come back to your work history, or you might have your education next. In those sort of situations for international medical graduates, key bits of information we're also looking for is your AMC status. So try and sort of get that in the first third of your first page of CV. How far through the AMC process have you got? That helps us to sort of make rapid decisions too. Yeah, observerships do help, particularly if you can then get a reference from the person that you've done your observership under. In my experience, I've seen a lot of international medical graduates do, other para-health work. Some even become registered nurses or work as assistant in nursing, or work as phlebotomists, or in other health-related fields. And I think that's actually very useful to do that too, because it gives you a bit of a way of acclimatising to the Australian health system. And generally, what I found as a person selecting for many years,
You'll have a reference from someone from that healthcare organisation who can give a very good view of how you work within the healthcare team, and so that can be particularly helpful too. So I'll just, there may be more questions, but I might just move on to this issue of cover letters. I've just pulled this screenshot from the New South Wales Health website for the JOMO recruitment, and they have, there's a bunch of useful information there for people applying for JOMO jobs, including a job seeker FAQ. But you'll notice I put an arrow here, and I've done a little video on this recently on YouTube. But question, do I need a cover letter? No, you're not required to submit a cover letter. When you actually go onto the online application system, it almost seems like it's trying to discourage you from uploading a cover letter. Cover letters are probably a bit of a throwback from a time when we didn't have e-recruitment systems and email, etc. I still think there's a role for them, particularly as you become more senior, particularly maybe if you're just going for one job where you really want that job. But I think at the level of going for senior resident basic trainee jobs where there's lots of people applying for multiple positions, and where frankly probably we just don't spend much time looking at the cover letter anyway, because we're looking at how you fill in the selection criteria online plus your CV. You're probably better off putting your effort into making a good CV and filling in those selection criteria on the online application well, and you can probably skip the cover letter. But as I said, as you go out, maybe if you're just applying for one job, particularly if you're applying for like an advanced trainee position or a consultant position, let's still do it. Why? The thing about cover letters is it is important for doctors to still know how to write a letter, and maybe Neil and I have to put together a course on this one as well, because I think this is another gap in medical training that's not done particularly well. There's not a lot of focus on teaching people the skill of writing letters, and I think that it almost does track back now to even high school, so we can't just blame the medical training system for that. So if you can put together a cover letter for your consultant job application, that will stand you in good stead. So that brings us to question time. We've got a little bit of time for, could we see the slide about cover letters? Sorry, that was just, I skimmed over that one because I'd already covered it a little bit original. But as I said, cover letters, as I say, for the more junior bulk applications, probably not much point. Definitely don't do one if they say don't give us one. That'll annoy people. Do it when applying for one job. Do it when you really, really want the job. And do it when it's a more senior job in particular. There are a couple of techniques for cover letters. One is to sort of spend a paragraph addressing each selection criteria using something like the star or card technique, which I've talked about in some of my videos. That usually gets you to 2 pages, which can be a little bit boring to go through. The other one is to just do a brief cover letter, which you can do in about 4 sentences. It doesn't take too much time. And that one you can sort of basically reference your CV as addressing the selection criteria in it, which is then pointing them towards that. So I've actually developed a course on cover letters and applying online, which a few people have been testing and will be available. It's actually available in beta at the moment, where you can get a little bit more information about this as well. So if you have experience or projects or qualifications outside of medicine, should you include these or just focus on the medical career path? I think it's good to put other things in your CV. Again, you can put it under skills or additional qualifications. You can sometimes package up education and training as a heading. It's about if you've got a particular skill that really meets the selection criteria. Let's say you're going for advanced training fellowship, which is about managing a research project. Let's say in a previous life you were a project manager in engineering or something like that. Well, you could actually put that in your career goals summary and then have some more detail about it later in your CV. So yeah, definitely include all those extra things. It's just a matter of where does it go, and bearing in mind that we're looking at the front page. So if it really sells you, get it on that front page in some way. If it comes up as a question in the interview, well, then you've got it in your CV, so you can then do that. As it says in my CV, I was an IT professional, and it sounds like you've got a few challenges about IT implementation in your hospital or whatever it is. So you can kind of reference it back there too. Yeah, so definitely include all those things. If you've had any substantive jobs prior to medicine, so normally there's a gap. You've done life outside medicine, medical school, a few part-time jobs during medical school, postgraduate training. You can probably drop those part-time jobs in medical school unless they're particularly significant. But definitely include those other jobs you've done before. They should go down on your work history, because people do sometimes Google people and just sort of see what they've done or look at their LinkedIn. And we don't want to, it's useful to put those things down anyway, but you should list your substantive job history all the way back to where you started working. Question from Melvin. You covered mainly tips for junior medical staff. Any specific tips for advanced trainee pre-consultant level? Look, I think a lot of what I've said applies, particularly the career goals statement is even more important, and you'll have a lot more things to talk about potentially in that career goals statement. So I would emphasise that particularly as something that can eye grab. As I said, the advanced trainee and the sort of advanced trainee jobs tend to be a little bit more specific and have a few detailed selection criteria. For example, they might have a component around research. So try and, if you've done some good research, try and put that in your career goals statement. As an example, I guess sometimes skills, you've picked up a bunch of skills and done some extra courses by then, so that could sort of make its way in there as well, that sort of stuff. Probably the other thing, as I said, Melvin, if with the advanced trainee pre-consultant jobs, you're usually applying for one or two, so probably then do write a cover letter. Just, that gives you another opportunity to tailor it in a little bit more. Thanks for your talk and advice on CVs and cover letters. I was wondering if you could give your experience on when in the application process would referees generally be contacted. So, Jingyang, thank you for the question. Best practice would say before the interview. Reality is often after the interview or around the interview. So, why does the reality kick in? Again, New South Wales is probably going to get maybe 50,000 applications for their jobs this year as the biggest system, but it'll be similar for similar big bunches for places like Queensland and Victoria, etc. For a few thousand jobs. So for some positions you're getting a couple of hundred or more candidates for maybe 20 jobs. So it's just impractical. Even if you've culled a lot of people out first, it is very impractical to do 100 referee checks before you interview people. And whilst it's better to do that because it removes bias and the referee check's actually more valid generally than the actual interview process, it's generally done the other way around. What happens in New South Wales is you go into the application system, they ask you to list referees on the system, and I think this one, last time I checked, you can't vary those. So you've got 2 or 3 in there listed, and that goes up for every job that you apply for. As soon as someone's interested in interviewing you for a job, from their side, the employer side, they will press a button that sends out a request to those referees for references, and then there's a generic reference form. And this happens in most other places as well. It's just about streamlining the process and making it more manageable for the referee person as well. Often some referees have got, lots of people asking for them to be referees, so you've got to be fair to them. But the problem is it's a generic form that doesn't get tailored to the job per se, and it's in written form, so people are not going to, they're going to say certain things in a written form. You're much more likely to get to the honest truth from people if you give them a call. So some panels will then they'll take those referee reports, and they'll be considered usually at the interview. They'll be available to look at. But then afterwards, there might be a process where they call people up just to get a bit more information and check out a few things. The problem is if you're calling after you've basically made the decision at interview, you're really trying to confirm your decision. So you're not going to be open to hearing, or as open to hearing information that counteracts that, which is why it's recommended to call before. So hopefully that answers the question. So basically they fill in a form generally, and then they may or may not be contacted afterwards for a verbal reference. You should always let your referees know what you're applying for and when they might be contacted too. Okay, no, thank you. Thanks for a helpful response. Happy to help there. So just while there might be some more questions coming in, just some options that you can help Neil and I in terms of supporting us. We do have a YouTube channel. I've now got up to 100 subs, so it's called Career Doctor. You can easily find that on YouTube, and it would be, as I said, there's a bunch of videos up there around some of this stuff. They're all for free, so I would encourage you to watch them. And if you're finding them helpful, subscribe and turn on notifications, and then you'll know when the next ones are coming out. We do have a Facebook page called Advanced Med AU, where if you like us, that'll get you more information in terms of what we're putting on that platform. There is also a group on Facebook, which I think we're waiting for the 100th member. They've got up to 99. Its full name is Trainee Doctor Career Support Group, but it's a group by Advanced Med, which again is free to join. I generate a lot of the ideas for the YouTube channel from people posting in that group, and we try and put some of our early content into that group. And you can follow me on Twitter. So you know, these are all sort of free options for supporting, but also helping yourself in terms of being connected with us and what we're doing. In terms of some of the other options, even better for supporting us, we do put a lot of time and effort into some of our work, and to keep things going, we do sell a few services. So next Monday night, I'm doing a CV masterclass for anyone who's interested. That's $150. It's an hour with me and no more than 12 other trainees in a closed group, so that we're not sharing your CV with the rest of the world. In a precursor to that, you also get access to the Build a Great CV course, which is currently, I've just dropped it down to $110, but some value between about $100 and $200 with an hour and a half worth of video content and other things in it that can help you to build a really standout CV. We also offer a CV review service. And on our Teachable side at the moment, we've got a course bundle, which includes the CV course. And I've just got one more lesson to finish off in the next couple of days on the cover letters and applications course. That's available for $140 for pre-purchase. If you do that now, you'll also get access to the interview skills course when I complete that in early August. We're not sure what we'll price that at, but it's probably going to be somewhere like $400 when it's fully completed. And there are a few coaching options as well if people are interested in things like interview skills coaching or other types of coaching. I may find helpful, and I can see Jinghang just signed up as possibly our 100th subscriber to the Trainee Doctor Career Support. So thank you, Jinghang. There's that link to the visual CV. Go and try it out. It costs you nothing to sign up. You can try out. The only hook is if you want some of their more fancy pro templates, you do have to pay, I think, $12 US a month. That also allows you to take their small limited branding of it. But if you just want to try building your CV in that format, it's quite handy, and it kind of gives you a bit of a look and feel for how to make a nice one as well. So question. Thanks, anyone. Do you have any advice specifically applying to HMO 2-3 years at Victorian hospitals? For internship, a standardised CV is required. But for HMO 2-3, we are able to submit whatever style we want. Should we still follow the same headings, e.g. including personal interest? Look, I've looked at a few of the standard templates for CVs around Australia and New Zealand. So actually, if you go to the fine print, if you look at the Queensland one, it's basically saying it's a guideline. And actually, it's very much based on the Medical Board of Australia's CV template, and that one's actually been put together to help doctors from overseas provide the sort of information that the medical board needs to make the judgment around their CV. So I'm not even, if you can send me either post in the chat or later on when you get a chance, anthony@advancedmed.com.au, if you send me a link to that internship standardised CV, I'll have a look at it. But I recommend wherever possible, do your own CV because it just helps to stand out. You don't want your CV to look like everyone else's. It won't stand out then. They will give you the information they want, so you can look at that, you can take that on board, get someone to check that you put everything down that's required, but then do it in your own format. I think it's a skill that employers value. Can you put together can you synthesize your information well? Can you present it well? It sells you as a better candidate. So look, my advice would be to do your own version. Oh, thanks for the link there, Dave. Yeah. So I will check that out, and I might sort of post my thoughts about that one as well. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, thank you very much for participating tonight. I hope you have a good rest of the evening. And as I said, we've sent you out an email with some information on what I've been talking about tonight. Once we get the video sorted and up online, we'll let you know when that's out as well. Thank you very much.